All right, folks, it's Bass Action back in action here. In this video, we are going to go over how to write the equation for sine and cosine based on a graph. And it's important to remember that any sine or cosine graph is going to have an infinite number of equations that you could write for that particular graph, because the graph itself is going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity, and we could choose any particular start point that we want. So in this video, I'm going to show you a few ways to go about that and how we could get a variety of equations, but ultimately we will only write one of each kind on this video. All right, let's take a look at the graph that we have over here for our sine and cosine. We recognize it as the shape of sine and cosine. The first thing that you want to do before you even try to jump in and do anything else is you want to find where that center line is. So we can see a high point and we can see a low point here, and we want to find where our center line is, because that's going to allow us to find our vertical shift and our amplitude, and then it's also going to give us a line to be able to focus on so that we can start to find our period and phase shifts. So when I look at this, I can see that the dividing line here would be at 3. And I like to draw it in. It's just a good visual reminder for me. That immediately tells me that there's going to be a vertical shift of 3. And then we can also see, looking from the high now to that center line, we can also now see what the amplitude is. So we can see that their amplitude here is going to be a 4. What that's going to let us do is actually even start building our equations right away. So come down here to these two boxes, and I want you to see what's going to be the same and what's going to be different for both of them. So they'll both be a y equals. Since they both are going to have the same vertical shift, we can drop in that 3 right away. They're both going to have an amplitude of 4, but I'm going to leave out the plus or minus, because this plus or minus is going to be based on whether or not the graph or the place that we're starting has a reflection or not. So I'm going to leave that part out different for each of these right now. Then I can drop in the sine. I can drop in the cosine. I'm going to give myself some parentheses, and we're going to set these up in a nice factored form. It's just going to be a little bit easier for us to work with. So I can go ahead and I can set up the x's and the parentheses, and then we just need to go back and we need to find whether we're going to use a reflection, what our period change will be, and what our phase shift is going to be. All right, now to start to figure out what the period change is going to be, that's going to be our next thing that we're going to do, we need to find a place along our graph to start. So we can either pick any of our high or low points as a mental start place, or we can pick any of the places that it crosses our center line. Those are going to be the easiest places to create this graph. So on mine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this high point right here. So I see that I have a high point up here, that's at a pi over 12. Then as I would trace this graph, so if I traced this, tracing this whole thing till I get back up to that same high point, there we go. Now I've traced a full period. So I'm going to put in my other dot, and I'm going to see that the next one is at 13 pi over 12. So the difference between these is a 12 pi over 12, or in other words, a pi. So the period for this graph is pi. That's going to allow me to work backwards and find the omega. So normally we would do 2 pi, or we would do the period is 2 pi over the omega. So now we're going to work backwards. We know the period, and our normal formula is 2 pi over omega. And for some of you, it might be a little easier if you put that left side over 1. And what we're essentially doing is we're cross-multiplying here. Now, really, we could do this in our head. We can visualize that the pi's are going to cancel, so we're going to get w equals 2. But if that's too much, just cross-multiply, and either way, you should be able to get to the omega equals a 2. What that is now going to let us do is go put that omega down into our equations. So I can put a 2 and a 2. That's going to be the same whether it's sine or cosine. That's not going to change. Now what we need to do is we need to pick a place to start. So let's say that I want to use this point right here as the start for my cosine graph. I know it's cosine because cosine always has a start that's going to be above the center line or below the center line, but it's not on it. So if I pick this as my start, then my cosine graph would not have a reflection. So if this is my start, then this is going to be a plus. But I want you to notice that I could also choose this point down here as the start for the cosine graph, in which case my graph would have a reflection. Now, I'm not going to do that in this video now. I'm not going to write that one down, but just know this is a possibility. This could also be a start point. So I'm going to pick this one right here as my start. And if this is my start, then I have a phase shift of pi over 12. If this was my start, I'd have a phase shift of 7 pi over 12. So my phase shift for my cosine graph is going to be pi over 12. And there's not going to be a reflection. So that means that down here on my equation here, I'm going to write minus pi over 12 because that's my phase shift. And remember, we always write it in that negative notation. And I'm going to put a plus in front of the 4 because there was not a reflection. Now I can take a look at the sine. So to find a good start point for sine, we want to pick any of the points that are right on the center line. It doesn't matter which one you pick. Any of them are actually going to do. So I'm going to choose this one right here. So if I choose this as my start point and I started tracing this as a sine graph, I would be going down. So this one's going to have a reflection. If I had chosen this as my start point, then I would trace and go up. So this would not have a reflection. So 5 pi over 6, there would be no reflection. But at this point, pi over 3, there will be. So I'm going to say my phase shift is pi over 3. And then, yes, I'm going to have a reflection. So when I write my equation, I'm going to put minus pi over 3 because it was to the right. And then I'm going to put a minus in the front for the reflection on that graph. All right, that's all we have for sine and cosine. And there will be 2 more videos for you to watch related to tangent, cotangent, and secant and cosecant.